Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of EEP Africa Knowledge Week 2025. This session is being recorded. My name is Keodara, and I'm the Fund Communications Officer at EEP Africa. It's a pleasure to host you all today. So EEP Africa Knowledge Week is a 3-day virtual event exploring emerging themes and innovative projects in the clean energy sector across Southern and Eastern Africa. And most importantly, the goal of this week is to empower the voices of entrepreneurs. So before we dive into this insightful session, I would like to share a few house rules. If you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to send them into the Q&A, which is located next to the chat function. If you see a question that you would like answered as well, please give it a vote so that we can prioritize it. And you can vote on a question by clicking the arrow under the question. And we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible if there is time at the end of the session. So the agenda for today, we will share more about EEP Africa with a presentation given by the team leader, Jussi Viding. Then we will have an interview with the winner of the Project of the Year award by yours truly. And to conclude, Susanne, Hounsell, Head of Portfolio for EEP Africa, will share more details of the upcoming call for proposals. So without further ado, I hand the floor over to you, Jussi.
Thanks, Kelly, and welcome all also from my behalf. Let me switch to the presentation. I hope it's nicely visible to all of you. As Kelly mentioned, I'll kick off with the standard EEP Africa introduction, as there might be some callers online that haven't heard about us from before. So I'll share you the basics, what we stand for, what's our mandate, and then I'll go over the upcoming call for proposals format and show some statistics from past years. So let's start with the kind of regular EEP Africa information splash. So EEP Africa is an open-ended multi-donor trust fund. Our current donors consist of Austria, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, NDF, Norway, and Switzerland. And the open-ended within our mandate means that we don't really have an end date. As long as we are successful about fundraising, we can continue our operations for unforeseeable future. Our mandate and niche in the market is to act as a kind of early risk taker, supporting locally driven innovative clean energy businesses to really take that first concept proofing, de-risking their scale up before hopefully private capital will become interested in their activities and funding them. The EEP Africa team consists of 3 different organizations. So I represent the Nordic Development Fund, which is the fund manager and host institution. We are located in Helsinki, which is quite far from our target market of Southern and Eastern Africa. Hence, we've chosen to cooperate with SNV and Open Capital, who provide us implementation support services. So most of the EEP Africa team sits in Nairobi. That's where Susanne is, for example, based. And then we also have staff based in Harare. EEP Africa works over kind of 3 main activity areas. Clean energy financing is our biggest activity. That's our core. We provide grants and repayable grants through open and competitive annual calls for proposals process, which will be launched next week. The typical grant size varies between 200 to 500,000 euros. I think on average it's usually around 400, but we can go up to 1 million also. For each project that we finance, we require some risk sharing. So there needs to be co-financing into the project from elsewhere, from other sources. And that co-financing needs to be minimum 30 to 50%, depending on the size of the ask, as well as the maturity of the company. And part of it can also be in kind in case of very early stage startups. And Susanne will later on provide a bit more insight on that. In addition to financing, we also have an annual budget for business development support services and investment facilitation. So we are really hoping our grantees to improve their investment readiness and can carry out certain activities in that. Also, those grantees who really demonstrate that they are becoming more investable, we try to introduce them to our vast network of investors and provide connections and matchmaking. For each of the grantees, we can also provide them with 2-year membership to a relevant industry association, and we can also sponsor them with one sector event attendance for networking and kind of with peers and investors alike. We can also use our kind of BDS budget for end user studies that help the companies to understand if their product is a market fit, how their business is viewed by their customers. Finally, the third activity pillar is really knowledge and partnerships. We have a mandate to share the lessons that we learn. This is one form of it, EEP Africa Knowledge Week. Then we can also publish case studies, thematic publications, try to create networking and peer-to-peer learning opportunities on the sidelines of events or virtually to our grantees and partners. And then we'll try to promote our grantees whenever the chance. And many of you might have noticed, for example, the social media campaign that we had about like a few months ago that introduced all the new grantees from last year's call. So that will be coming again soon and will be also done for the successful applicants from this call round. We've also recently established an alumni network that we are now trying to operationalize and become more active with that also. And the idea is to really keep tabs also what's happening to our past grantees and still provide them with further networking and investment facilitation and learning opportunities. And across all of these 3 main activities, we aim to coordinate with our sector partners to harmonize activities, remove duplication, really try to see that we build on each other's work, as the resources in general are quite limited in this space. So what does success look like for us? In terms of our donors, you can see the SDG indicators on the right, which we need to report them to and provide them with that kind of analysis. But for us, really, to analyze if EEP Africa is doing what it should be doing, it's more about emphasis on improved investment readiness on the companies that we support. So we are really hoping that the team you have is better off in the end of the grant than when, as compared to when you entered the portfolio. Same with the investor documents, your systems, and hopefully you've managed to prove the market fit or kind of reached a scale that will be attractive to follow-on investors. So that's how we really see kind of our success. Then the SDG indicators on the right, they become more relevant when your business grows and you are scaling up your activities. So those grantees that are really using our grant to de-risk their scale up, we expect to see a bit more of jobs and cost savings and whatnot from such projects. All in all, learning from failure is very much a kind of very important for us. As I mentioned, our mandate is to take that early stage risk. So we expect a degree of failure, but failure for us is failure only if we don't understand why something failed. If also we don't understand why something succeed, that's also a bit of a failure. So we are really hoping to learn from failure and then putting into kind of good use in the future. So the past years have taught us the following. We really strongly believe that grants need to be flexible. I think from the historic perspective, grants are often criticized of being very fixed, very rigid, focusing only on reporting on something that was promised sometime in the past. We do acknowledge that our call cycle takes a time, things change at that time. So there needs to be a certain degree of flexibility integrated in the grant so that the companies that we support can integrate the lessons from the project implementation straight in there. We can discuss modifications, we can discuss tweaks in the kind of projections and what you're supposed to do as long as the general business you're trying to run remains the same. All in all, we think that grant providers need to behave more like angel investors. I think that's the investor that is largely missing in the space where we act, that early stage risk-taking, impact-driven businesses. That's going to generate social impact not necessarily big financial returns. So us as grant providers, we need to more behave like equity. We really need to take personal interest to the companies that we support and really try to kind of trust them and support them on their kind of way and learn at every opportunity. So failure is really a learning opportunity for us. If that's one of the main things that you can take home from this call, that if you ever become a successful grantee for us, let's learn together and then try to be flexible within reason. So from your side, we are really hoping that if you become our grantee, communicate transparently, honestly, and in a timely manner, highlight challenges as soon as possible so that we can hopefully help you or refer you to some of our sector partners who have better instruments to help you, ask for support when needed, and then mutual trust. I think that's something that we really need to develop in order to better kind of help each other with the journey. Now a quick review for the call for proposals process. And then later on, in the end of this, Susanne will go through some more concrete tips for you to consider. But this is the rough format how our call is run. The kickoff launch will be next week, Monday. There will be about 5 weeks when the expression of interest phase, so the application phase is open. Then we will use some time in March and April to assess the eligibility of the applications and then evaluate those applications that pass the minimum kind of criteria. And Susanne will go over that later on. Then we will longlist a group of applicants. All of them will be invited to a pitch interview. During the pitch interview, we will ask a bit more questions, kind of to clarify things from your application. So really try to test if you are kind of running a business with the path to profitability and if you are invested in your business idea. And based on those interviews, we will then select a group for the shortlist. And that's the point when really kind of you need to put more time into your applications. The expression of interest is quite light. That's one of the past lessons that we've already kind of integrated in our system. At full proposal stage, then more time is needed. We expect you to go deeper in the budget, deeper in the project idea. We will already start the due diligence processes to look into your business, and all that information will be packaged in investment memos that we will submit in our investment committee in early September. They will have a few weeks time to review the documents, and usually towards late September, we will have the investment committee meeting. And the investment committee is an external body that has not been involved in the previous kind of evaluation stages. And then it's their word that kind of counts in the end. And they will then green light a set of applicants to the contracting phase, where we'll then start preparing the contract package, finalize the due diligence processes. And if those are passed satisfactorily, then you will sign a contract with Nordic Development Fund, who is the fund manager for EEP Africa. And that can be expected usually from December onwards, depending on how quickly you are able to provide all the documentation needed for the contracting. Just to shed some light on the past calls to manage expectations. The last 2 years, we've run a sizable call, attracted about 500 expressions of interest for each round. I would say 150 to 200 of those are quite fluff. They don't have the standard really to be kind of to warrant a full evaluation. So as a first note, really read carefully the application guidelines to assess if you are submitting a reasonable application, and Susanne will provide more information on that later. We've longlisted the past 2 years about 80, exactly 80 applications. About half of them then have reached the shortlist, so they enter the full proposal. And out of them, without any target, coincidentally, the investment committee has approved 32 projects in both of the last calls. In 2023, one company decided to drop after the IC approval. So in the end, we ended up contracting only 31. At the moment, the contracting from the last year's call is still ongoing, hence the 32 there is in red, so we are not 100% sure yet how many will reach the contract, but usually it is very high, either all of them or maybe one might drop out. The success rate there kind of demonstrates how many the ICE investment committee approved versus the submitted EOIs or versus the shortlisted amount. So here you can see a very low success rate to the total amount, but as I mentioned, there is quite a amount of fluff in the applications. However, once you get to the shortlist, then your success rate becomes high. So about only 1 out of 5 will be turned down at that point. It's about 80% success rate for those that kind of are passed through IC or passed through the shortlist. So using kind of similar ratios, we've done a bit of a forecasting exercise for this year's call. There will be a smaller available financing for this year's call for 2 reasons. One, we are really hitting our team's capacity to manage portfolio. Some of you might have seen that we've published recruitment for 3 portfolio managers end of last year. That hopefully will be finalized relatively soon. So we have a team capacity to take kind of too many projects at this moment. It's also a fundraising issue. So at the moment, it's safe for us to do a 7 million call and probably save some dry powder for the next year. And hence, with the discussions with our supervisory board, it had been decided that the maximum amount that we can commit in this year's call is 7 million. In practice, considering the average size of the grants, we are expecting that to translate to something like 16 to 20 projects. If we are getting a lot of applications for small grants, it might be a bit more, but it's likely to fall somewhere between that range. And then just using the success rate ratio and the 50% kind of shortlist from the long list ratio, then we are getting to the 20 to 25 shortlisted projects and most likely 40 to 50 to be invited to the long list stage. I'm not going to make a guess like how many EOIs we will receive, but I'm expecting it to probably be somewhere along the similar kind of bulk range than last year's. Then my final slide is on the kind of geographic and technology focus or distribution of the projects that have come in the last couple of calls. It's quite a nice spread between Southern and Eastern Africa in the past 2 years. Kenya, Uganda achieving the kind of most successful grantees, but then Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia also with 5. I think there are 8 countries, 5 or more projects from the last 2 calls. I think 4 of them Southern Africa, 4 from Eastern Africa. So quite a nice spread. No projects in the past 2 years from Botswana, Comoros, Eswatini, and Mauritius. But there, in terms of Comoros and Mauritius, they were only added as new countries last year, so we haven't really expected much from there, and they're also very small markets. So if you get one project from a small market, then proportionally that's already quite massive. In terms of technology, you can really see that productive uses of energy in all of their forms, as well as e-mobility. That's a topic that is currently kind of attracting a lot of discussion and kind of financing ask, and we'll see that also in our calls. Like the applications for mobility and productive uses energy have been quite high the past 2 years. But being a technology agnostic kind of financier in the renewable energy sector, we can finance pretty much anything as long as it's energy efficiency or renewable energy. So mini grids, clean cooking, we always get some of those. Residential electricity access, also some power generation, and then a little bit of energy efficiency and storage focused project applications also. Now I would pass it back to Kelly for the project of the year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jussi. As he said, we will hear more from Susanne about the next call for proposals in just a moment. But first, it is time to share the Project of the Year. So this Project of the Year award recognizes outstanding achievement or innovation by an EEP Africa portfolio company during the year 2024. And we are proud to present the winner of the EEP Africa Project of the Year award. Can we have a drum roll, please? To Plentify. Today we have John Cornick, CEO of Plentify, to share more about the company and their achievements. Feel free to ask John questions in the Q&A section. Hello, John. Good to see you.
You too, Kelly. And first of all, it's an honor to be here. I remember sitting in one of these presentations several years ago before we applied, and it's amazing to be on the other side.
Yeah, and look at you now. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's incredible. You have got a really impressive portfolio. So the fact that we've managed to stand out is a great honor.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today. Well, we would like to hear more about Plentify. Can you share with the audience the story of Plentify, maybe a little bit about how it came to life, the business model, and maybe what sets it apart?
Absolutely. Yeah, so Plentify, it wasn't born in an instant. It was the result of a career spent working at the intersection of energy, technology, and finance. But the idea for Plentify really crystallized in my last job before Plentify, and that was at Google, where I was helping to lead the African energy business. And in that role, we saw that most activity in the clean energy space was happening in one of two areas. It was either getting clean megawatts onto the grid, or it was getting people access to electricity for the first time through these small clean energy systems. But very little was, and to be honest, very little still is being done for the majority of Africa's population that is already connected to a grid system, but suffering the world's most expensive and unreliable power. And so that's the problem we created Plentify to try to solve, seeing if we could apply the latest technologies and business models to ultimately deliver affordable, reliable, and clean services to grid-connected households. So effectively what we're trying to do is we're trying to get homes to use more clean energy. And to solve that problem, there's a couple of ways you could go about it. You need to get clean energy where it's needed, and you need to get clean energy when it's needed. To get clean energy where it's needed, you need the solar panels or the wind turbines. To get it when it's needed is slightly more complicated because the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine at the times that people want to use electricity necessarily. And so you can solve that with something like batteries, but batteries are expensive to store that energy when it's generated for use when it's actually needed. And that's where Plentify comes in. What we do is we install devices onto the appliances in your home, and then those devices shift when your appliances use electricity to align as much as possible with clean energy. So instead of shifting clean supply to demand, we're shifting demand to clean supply and doing this for 75% cheaper than batteries. Our business model is that we primarily sell B2B through residential property companies and solar companies. We sell the hardware devices that go into appliances for an upfront fee, and then an ongoing service fee for the energy management service. And the great thing is that our service costs a fraction of the value that it delivers to the users. Finally, I think you asked what sets us apart, and I'd say that a couple of things come to mind. The first is our team. I'm really proud of the team we've built. It's about 60 people strong, and it's got representatives from some really world-class organizations like Google, Discovery Vitality, Tesla, IBM Research, and even NASA. So that's the one side of who's building the thing. And then what we've built, I'm obviously really proud of as well. And I think what differentiates us there is that we do a really good job of balancing value to the user and value to the system for the lowest dollar per kind of unit of impact. And let me give you a couple of examples to bring that to life. So there's another product, not our product. It's a class of products called Ripple controllers, Ripple relays. These are little switches that get installed on your electric water heater, and then your utility pushes a button and everybody's water heaters turn off, and the utility pushes a button again and everybody's water heaters turn on. So this is it's a pretty mature technology. It's been around for about 50 years, and it is great for the system because the utility can shed load on demand. But it is terrible for the user because you end up suffering a cold shower completely outside of your control. But the flip side exists as well. And I think a good example there, in South Africa at least, is residential batteries. So with a Resi battery, if you can afford to buy one, that's great. And you get immense user value because you can see yourself through an outage. But the problem in a place like South Africa, where we have these rotational blackouts, is that as soon as your power comes back on, you start recharging your battery, which counteracts the rotational blackouts happening in the next suburb. And so it's actually terrible for the system, even though it delivers good user value. In fact, so terrible for the system that anybody who can't afford to get a battery themselves are the ones on the hook, end up paying ultimately the cost of this poor reliability, driving actually massive inequality. And so what we do at Plentify is we figure out ways to align incentives to deliver value to the user and deliver value to the system while charging as little as possible for the service and the hardware. And Project Smart Geyser, the project that we did with EEP Africa, was actually probably the best demonstration we've done of the ability to balance these needs.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Sounds like incredible work that you are embarking on. Speaking of EEP Africa, could you share more about how we have supported your journey? For instance, has there been some sort of key support that we provided that maybe you couldn't access elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, just to be clear what EEP Africa supported, they helped co-fund Project Smart Geyser. This was a 3-year project in the Western Cape province of South Africa. We rolled out 500 smart water heater controllers to homes and tried to demonstrate that these appliances, if controlled correctly, could enable affordable, reliable, and clean services. EEP Africa's involvement had impact on the project directly in a number of ways. Firstly, it enables us to scale the project up to 5 times as many homes and thereby increase the credibility of the results. Secondly, it enabled us to expand the services tested to a whole bunch of solar-related services, which otherwise weren't part of the project scope. And they provided, you provided, thank you, a much earlier stage funding than the private sector would have been willing to step in and provide at this critical moment in our technology. But kind of stepping back from the impact on the project directly, EEP Africa has had a pivotal impact on our company more generally as well. I mean, I see this EEP Africa project as one of the key turning points in our organization for a number of reasons. Like the one is that, you know, the results of the project were groundbreaking. And thanks to EEP's support, we could do this project. And we've taken the results and we've shopped it around to private sector players. We've shopped it around in international markets. And we received a ton of really positive private sector interest as a result of this project. It's led to many engagements with South African policymakers, and it's got us into the room to talk about the potential for technologies to shape a better energy grid, and hopefully we can influence policy in that way. And then finally, and probably most tangibly, we've raised 10 times as more private capital since the EEP Africa project than before the EEP Africa project. So it really has set us on a completely different trajectory.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you very much for sharing that. We're very happy to hear that. So there is a reason why we exist. So throughout this whole journey, did you encounter any challenges that you can share with us and how you overcame them?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So I mean, what we're trying to build Plentify is a global energy management business, and we've started in South Africa. And maybe it's our origins in South Africa, but every problem we come across, we see as an opportunity. And that's actually what's made South Africa such an amazing place to build this business, because pretty much every energy problem exists. And so it's an incredible laboratory to test out developing solutions that tackle real problems, for which generally there are customers on the other side that are suffering a pain point or are willing to pay. Versus if some of our competitors will be focused on absorbing excess wind power in Canada at night, something very, very specific and niche, given that's the problem that exists in that market. So I think the abundance of energy issues has been actually a major advantage to the development of our company. And then the secondary impacts of working in a weak grid market, things like the telecommunications networks go down when there's a power outage, also meant that we had to be quite creative in how we developed our product to be resilient in these harsh conditions, which ultimately makes us a much more powerful product as we try to expand to other markets. So yeah, we've tried to shape these challenges into opportunities, and I'd say that the challenge that sits most prominently in front of us right now is how we scale up our operations and systems fast enough to deal with the demand that we see in front of us.
Sounds like a positive problem. If we look forward a few years, you mentioned something about expanding into new markets. Where do you envision Plentify in the next, say, 5 years?
Yeah, as I mentioned, our ambition is to be a global energy management company, and we are a mission-driven organization. So when we think about where we want to be, we think about the impact we want to leave behind. And we think about that impact in two ways: the impact in South Africa, which is our home market, it's very close to our hearts, and then the impact globally. So in South Africa, the story is really about energy security. We've gone through a period of, what's it now, 17 years of rolling blackouts. We're in a lull at the moment. Hopefully it continues. But the truth remains that we are in a weak grid market. And so our goal is within the next 5 years to be responsible for mitigating 20 hours per month of blackouts for everyone in South Africa. And we think there's a clear path to doing that. And actually that metric comes from this EEP Africa project, which provided the data necessary to prove that we can do this and at what scale we need to reach in order to achieve it. For the second part, around the global impact, there it's really about the energy transition. We exist to ultimately fight climate change, and through switching from fossil fuels to renewables. And so we want to be active in probably at least 4 to 5 new markets and enabling in the gigawatts of additional solar capacity.
Thanks. I've got one more question for you. It's a curveball question. So what is your advice, John, to companies that want to break into and succeed in the clean energy sector?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think probably the most important thing is identify a real market need, test that market need with real customers, understand that they're willing to pay, and then start building. I think a problem we see actually in startups everywhere is that people jump to the solution before they've proven that there's actually a market opportunity. And I think in something like clean energy, where the solutions are often not just software-based, but hardware-based, those timelines and the expense to get to a point where you can actually get to market is so much greater that de-risking that and trying to get answers cheaply, quickly from potential customers is critically important.
Thank you so much, John. Let's see if we have any questions for you in the chat before we continue. Does anyone have any questions for John? If you do, please put them into the chat or raise your hand. We can open your mic. I'll give it a couple more seconds. If not, how can people reach you, John?
They are welcome to reach out to Plentify at support@plentify.io, and they'll forward along to me.
Well, there you have it. Again, congratulations, John, to you and to Plentify for taking home the Project of the Year award. We look forward to following your journey and continued success. Many wishes for you.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you. So now it's time to dive into the details of the latest call for proposals, officially launching this Monday. The floor is yours, Susanne.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And yeah, congratulations also from my end to John and to Plentify for winning the Project of the Year award. Plentify was very generous to host us twice last year, and even just seeing the progress within those 11 months in between was really, really impressive. So well done and well deserved. Let me take some time now to just walk you through how we select our applicants and give you a little bit more advice on the criteria that we apply, the key points to look out for as you're preparing your expression of interest for this process. Just one quick note up front though, the presentation that I'm about to give is not exhaustive, so please make sure that you refer to the CFP guidelines as well as the project implementation manual and the FAQs, which will all be already on the EEP Africa website available for you to complement any information that you're receiving here. We move to the next slide. Thank you. In terms of the evaluation checks, Jussi already mentioned, we start with an eligibility check. And where we look at, okay, you know, are you eligible and are you matching our criteria? So who we can fund the private sector. There was already a question in the chat whether a non-for-profit can be funded, not as a lead applicant. So you have to be a legally registered entity that is really aiming to run a commercially self-sustaining business eventually. You don't already have to be commercially self-sustaining, but that needs to be sort of your focus. You can, however, apply as a partner, and we'll get to that later as well. The other key criterion that we look at is whether or not you have been registered for at least 6 months before the opening date of the call for proposals. So this year, if you've been registered before mid-August last year, you are eligible to apply. And we do need to see your company registration and your tax registration. Geographically and also in terms of technologies, Jussi mentioned a few things already. Just a quick note on the regional projects. Keep in mind that you have a cap of maximum 1 million euros for our funding. So see what you can actually do with that on a regional basis. Typically what we see is that maybe 2, maximum 3 countries are feasible in the projects that we've seen so far for regional projects. In terms of technologies, we are technology agnostic, but that also includes products and services. So not just the hardware, but also software, also business models that we look at. If you can sort of present some innovation around that, we can look at it. And as Jussi mentioned, renewable energy or energy efficiency focused. We have 4 different project types that we can fund. Do refer to the guidelines for a little bit more detail, but we essentially have pilot projects, scale-up projects, and replication projects, but we can also fund feasibility studies. And I'll give more detail on some of the funding requirements there later. If we go to the next slide. So the other side of the coin is, as you define your projects, what will get you disqualified? One key point that we look for very early on during the eligibility check already is whether or not your project risks increasing or prolonging the use of fossil fuels. That's a no-go for us. We cannot fund any projects that pose that risk. The other point that we look for is if your project scope is only looking at soft activities. So, for example, market studies or capacity building, training, policy development, these can all be components of your project, but they shouldn't be the sole focus. So that would also get you disqualified quite early. We can't fund projects or technologies that are at R&D stage or where there's no minimum viable product yet. So unfortunately, we're not really at that early stage. So we need to have a proof of concept there already. Projects where we don't see additionality, we'll do look a little bit deeper into that as we go to the evaluation stage, but already a quick check at the eligibility stage. If you're looking to finance a solar home systems project in Kenya, a very mature market for solar home systems, then it's unlikely that you'll be able to pass through just for the geographic additionality aspect. If we see that you have extensive funding and resources, even from commercial financiers or other sources of funding, then we will question financial additionality. So really look at what's your baseline and is the project or is our funding adding value here? The other point that we really noticed last year, in particular, as ChatGPT came on the line, is that responses at times would be incomplete or very basic. So we don't mind that you use AI to respond to some questions, but do make sure that you go those levels deeper. Make sure that your responses are really project specific. If we find that we have insufficient information to evaluate a project already as we just scan through, or if you just write 1 sentence as a response, that's not enough for us to take you to an evaluation for the full project. So we would then remove your application at this stage already. And then we also do need to see some mandatory documents. It's very clear in the EOI form which ones are required and which ones can be provided at a later stage. We go to the next slide, please. What we can cover with our grant is really quite flexible, actually. So, already from the scope of the project, but also in terms of the financing. We're very flexible, but we can't do working capital. So we really have to see a project budget that is also relatively balanced. But within that project budget, you can cover staff costs, you can cover fixed assets, acquisition of goods, etc. There's a lot of detail around this also in the project implementation manual. What we do want to see is that the budget, that how you're using the money is being used to leverage your company or towards becoming more successful and sustainable financially and as a business as a whole. We do also like to see some skin in the game from our grantees. So Jussi already mentioned, we do require co-financing, but there is also an element of repayability for our grants. So anything over 500,000 euros, that amount will be repayable. Feasibility studies are fully repayable at financial close. And then there is a possibility that the investment committee might look at your company, at your application, and say this company should demonstrate more skin in the game. So they should, for example, make the budget component for acquisition of goods repayable. So then that's something that we then have to, as a condition on your contracting. So we need to rework that into the budget at that stage. So be prepared for that, especially if you're a more mature company. You can also, as an applicant yourself, demonstrate that skin in the game from the outset and say, I would like to make my grant repayable. Repayability means within 5 years after project close, 0% interest. So quite flexible terms. We go to the next slide. As I said, there's also co-financing requirements. And that really, your co-financing approach depends on the project type, as well as your company maturity. Again, I'm referring you to the CFP guidelines. There's a matrix there that will help you to identify at what maturity stage your company would be classified as. We have 3 approaches. The most common approach to co-financing is a 70-30 approach for feasibility studies, scale-up projects, and replication projects. So 70% grant financing, 30% cash co-financing. So very simple, and the cash co-financing can come from various different sources. Then there are 2 alternative approaches. One is really just for pilot projects, and for pilot projects by early stage companies. Now, our definition of early stage is quite broad. So basically, as long as you're not a mature company, you might be able to access this type of co-financing where we're asking for 20% in-kind contribution. And that's also defined in a lot of detail in the project implementation manual, what that entails. And then for mature companies and for projects that are asking for funding over 500,000 euros, we're asking for 50-50% co-financing. But again, it really also comes down to the investment committee, what they feel is feasible. But usually we have good guidance, and we already provide guidance during proposal development stage. One thing I would advise here is that keep in mind, especially for the higher ticket sizes, that 50-50 co-financing component as you're deciding on the grant amounts that you're asking for, considering that we have a reduced funding amount available this year. So there will be less opportunities for large grants, though there will still be a few where it's justified. If we go to the next slide, one earlier, yes, thank you. So I've mentioned skin in the game extensively already, but that also includes active development of your project. What have you done so far already on your project in terms of progress, in terms of engagements with partners? Maybe you already have some traction, especially for pilot projects. That's quite important for us to see. We do also look at the team or the vision of a team. We like to see a strong and enthusiastic leader. But if you're a founder and you don't have a full team in place yet, we are able to support you in building that team with our grant. So we like to see a vision for the team that you want to have in place for this project. We do need to see local leadership. and local partners. You don't necessarily, as a lead applicant, have to be in country, although we like to see that. But if you have a strong local partner that is on the ground, that knows the context, that's definitely what we would like to see. We also, as you're defining your objectives, we want to see realistic and quantifiable outputs. We're not looking for huge scale. We're not a results-based financing mechanism. We do go for quality over quantity, although we do have some scale-up projects where we like to see numbers. But for us, really what is important is that we have a quality project and we see impact reaching the bottom of the pyramid, reaching vulnerable communities, and demonstrating how you're really using that grant to improve the situation on the ground. Last few points, we need to see a clear route to market and a plan for implementation. There are specific questions around this in the EOI stage already, activities, and make sure that these activities then align to your budget. And do be self-aware and don't hesitate to, demonstrate that you have some gaps that you need filling, where you need support. We are aware that we're working with very early stage companies at times, so but we like to understand, how we can help. And also understanding of your own risks. And lastly, and Jussi already alluded to that when he was talking about building trust, we like to start building trust at an early stage already when we get to the pitch interviews after the EOI. Really seeing proactive communication, transparent communication, and respectful communication is really, really core and important for us. I'm almost through. If you get to the next slide. So in an attempt to capture all I've just said, we have an evaluation structure that we apply to your EOI submission. As you register on SmartME and the call becomes available, you'll see 6 forms. And 2 of those we are not going to evaluate, but you will gain some brownie points with us that don't feed into your evaluation, but if you can fill them in. And one is the technical assistance needs. So what I just mentioned, that aspect of self-awareness, do let us know what you expect to need help with. Is it marketing? Is it HR? Is it finance? Aspects like that. And the other one is a market survey that we already ran in 2023 once. And it really helps us to understand what is going on in the market, and how we can help you as an applicant, but also the wider sector better with our funding. The ones that we do evaluate is definitely the applicant profile. And here we do look at the company maturity, the ownership, so the majority ownership in particular. So are you a women-owned company? Are you a company owned by someone from the country of implementation of the project? That will get you extra points. And you can also be a company from wider sub-Saharan Africa. You can also be a company from the rest of the world, but that will reflect in the scoring of the responses. And local leadership as well. So what does your senior leadership look like? What's the share of women in senior leadership? But also local leadership in terms of who's your local partner, who you're working with on the ground. That's particularly relevant for a company outside of the country of implementation. The big chunk of the EOI is really your project description. And here, what we're keen to see is really the quality and content of your responses. These are 8 open questions, 300 words each. So you don't have to write a lot, but the quality of it counts. So really demonstrating clear and strong understanding of each of these different points. What's your objective? Who are your partners and stakeholders? Really name names here. Who are you going to be working with? Who will influence the success of your project? Route to market. Which activities are you planning to undertake to make your project successful? Additionality I mentioned, active development I mentioned. Give us a product description of your service or the technology that you're looking to deploy, and describe your business model. And do give us a couple of risks that you're seeing that might affect your project. On the budget, make sure that the budget that you're asking for is aligning with what you're describing in your route to market, in your project activities, and in your scope. If you're looking for €1 million of EEP Africa grant funding to deploy, 200 solar home systems in Kenya, it's unlikely that you're going to be successful. So we need to see that relationship. So even if we're not asking for a detailed budget breakdown, do have a think of what do you realistically need for your project. And do also be transparent about what other financing sources you have. That's really helpful for us to also understand how our grant fits with what you already have in place, and how we can also be complementary also on the co-financing side, and give us some references for your investors and mentors. And then on the due diligence side, it's really a matter of demonstrating a clear understanding of what is required to implement your project from a legal regulatory side of things. What permits, licenses will you need? Any contractual agreements, letters of intents with your partners, very relevant and useful to have. We do understand that you might not have everything in place yet at this stage of the EOI, so there is an opportunity to submit some things at proposal stage, or even as you start implementation at the first milestone. I'm conscious I've been talking for a long time. I have one last slide with some typical questions that we get during the Q&A, so I'll just capture them up front very quickly. Can I apply if I don't have co-financing secured? Yes, you can. We are also able to help you secure co-financing even during proposal stage or in the early stages of your project implementation. Obviously, it's better and helpful if you already have an idea where your co-financing comes from. And we do definitely need to have it in place before any money moves. So that's on that question. Co-financing is very flexible, equity, debt, grants, other grants, results-based financing, etc. We can also accept cash reserves, and I already spoke about in-kind contributions. So do have a look at the project implementation manual for some more detail on that. The question on the NGOs, research institutions, I partially answered already. Do try and partner with a private sector company for implementation. We see a lot of really positive synergies there in these kind of projects, but always keep that commercial and self-sustaining aspect in mind. Keep in mind, how is that project going to continue after the grant closes? Can my company be awarded more than one grant? No, you cannot. Any individual company can only have one active grant at a time. However, if you currently have an EEP Africa grant, you want to come in as a partner to somebody else, that is possible. We have in the past received multiple applications from the same companies at the same time at EOI stage, but for different geographies through their local subsidiaries. And we ended up disqualifying all of them, especially where the projects were very similar. So just keep that in mind as well. Better to focus yourself on one country and take your chances there. And Jussi already mentioned the geographic diversification, which also speaks to the last question here. We really, in terms of target commitments, we don't have any, but we do want to have a diversified portfolio that's diverse both in geography as well as technologies, business models, and different types of grantees in terms of their maturity. Just to close out, in terms of next steps, please subscribe to the newsletter if you haven't already. Follow the social media channels. We will keep posting updates. Read the documents, please. And then get ready for Monday when the call will be open as you wake up, at least in this part of the world. And if you feel that your business idea is not quite ready for this call for proposals, do please consider next year. There will be another call in Q1 2026. Let me close it here. There's some final email addresses as well if you have any questions, but I'll hand it back to Kelly to guide us through the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanne. If I can ask you and Jussi to please stay on the line. There are some questions for you in the chat. Maybe we can recall a couple that have already been answered. So where to access the project implementation manual. My colleague has put a link there. The call page will be updated on Monday, and all the documents will be available there. All right. So Wim has asked, he noticed that you included transportation and travel as eligible costs. Would the purchase of a vehicle be eligible if needed to properly execute the proposed activities?
When it comes to the acquisition of assets, especially things like vehicles, we like to see the majority of that cost on the co-financing side in the budget. So yes, it is eligible, but we prefer that the majority goes on co-financing, so hence is being financed by the grantee.
Thank you. There's a specific question. Can you fund sustainable charcoal projects, specifically charcoal sourced from invasive tree species?
It depends on the source, and really the application. We would need to see the project scope as a whole, and how the general ecosystem is being managed.
Thank you very much. And Matthew, the recording of this presentation as well as the slides will be shared on our website shortly. Okay, let's see. Any questions? Please let me know if you see something that I am missing. Fidelis asked, are we able to apply for operations that will be done in a second country, even if we haven't started operations in that country?
Again, it really depends on what activities have you undertaken. If you haven't registered the company in the other country yet, possible. But have you already done some scoping on the ground? Have you identified local partners? Have you done an assessment of possible distribution channels, a market analysis, etc.? So that's something that we would like to see in such cases.
Thank you. There's a question, will it be possible to have feedback on a previous rejected 2024 application and use such information to improve the 2025 application we plan to submit?
Yes, that's possible. And we had offered that last year already. So if you missed that communication, and there were a lot of requests, so we tried to get through all of them. But if we missed it, then please resubmit. But yeah, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I could have said it. Or can you move, please? I hear echo. Yeah, excellent. Thanks. Yeah, so I was supposed to address this a bit during the kind of call statistics from past years. So usually when we've provided feedback, it's more on a cohort level. As we kind of saw, as you saw, we received 500 applications about each round. So it's unlikely that we are able to provide individual feedback for every single of those 500. So I think what we've done in the past, we've provided more like a cohort level feedback, like these are the typical things we saw at this call, these were the typical kind of weaknesses. But then kind of from the equal treatment perspective, if we provide individual feedback on one, we have to provide it to 500, and then having quite a limited resources as a team, our focus is more on the portfolio that we kind of need to manage. So I would say like once you get to the pitch interview phase and shortlisting, then there we can be a more kind of provide individual feedback. But I think every single application of the 500 that we might not have resources for, but we try to provide a more like a cohort level reply on what was the quality in general and what were the typical kind of weaknesses in general in that application round.
Thank you. Another question states, what is the implementation timeline and do you have payment milestones?
Yes, so we have, typically we look for projects that are around 18 to 24 months. And we do indeed work on a milestones basis. The milestones will be defined during the proposal development, usually 6 months milestones. We are able to provide advance payments, but that's decided on a case-by-case basis and not a general rule. And typically we work on a reimbursement basis. So you submit a report, your financial report, your technical report, and then you get a reimbursement from us against your budget and disbursement plan.
Thank you. Another question, is biogas production from city waste for communities cooking and lighting requirements?
If that's eligible?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
I see that Mary had your hand up. Do you want to speak on the microphone? I can put your mic on if you would like to share your question. Otherwise, if you do, put your hand up. Otherwise, we will continue with the chat questions. Is there a restriction on which countries are acceptable for partnership?
Not really, I would say. Jussi, do you want to take that one?
Not really, but there might be some nations currently that our investment committee wouldn't approve in terms of financing. But generally, as long as the project happens in one of the 17 focus countries, the lead applicant as well as the partners can come from other countries. We would more assess on, does the partnership make sense? Is it leading to hopefully a sustainable business in the future? But if there's a country which is on global sanction lists, then that would be probably a no-go for our investment committee.
Thank you. Next question. Can you fund a business that is already operational, but in different activities such as typical agriculture, but is now looking to expand into your focus area?
I would give the same answer that I did before with regards to the geographic expansion. If you can demonstrate that you've already actively looked into this space, then we would consider such an application, yes.
Thank you. Another question just popped in. What is the minimum grant level? And do we choose consultants for the feasibility study?
So typically the grants start at 200,000 euros. And for the feasibility studies, yes, we would expect that some of that work would be undertaken by consultants.
Thank you very much. It seems that we have answered most, if not all, of the questions. If you have any more, please put them in the chat. And keep in mind that we will update the answers to the general application questions on our frequently asked questions on our website later. So if your question was not answered in this call, don't worry, please check there shortly. But we do have a few more minutes if you do have a question to ask Jussi or Susanne about the new call for proposals. Give it another minute. Maybe someone is typing. Okay. Do you have limitations on lead applicant annual revenues in the financials?
Not really. I think it's more about, can you justify the grant? Is the project risky enough to warrant our financing?
And can we combine feasibility study and piloting?
That's a good question. Jussi, I'm going to throw that one to you. I think it really depends on the project. If the studies are part of the overall project and if the costs are sufficiently covered, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's typical, because then the feasibility study has that repayability pending financial close. So usually we see like a very classic feasibility study or pilot, but then I think the pilot projects might sometime have some kind of elements, as Susanne earlier indicated, that there might be these softer approaches where you would do like a little bit of market study or capacity building or some kind of testing as part of the pilot. So I think we would probably then, in such case, more look at it from the pilot perspective. At least according to my past experience, the feasibility study financing itself has been already sizable in most cases. So, but yeah, we have certain flexibility if it's not kind of in our exclusion list, if it's not explicitly in our application guidelines forbidden, then my advice would be just impress us, and then we'll see what happens. We are financing innovation, and I think many times we don't know what the innovation looks like until we read that application. So in that sense, there are certain elements that we cannot at this moment answer thoroughly. So if something is super innovative and you manage to provide a good case, why not?
Thank you very much. Now we do have time for a couple more questions. So if you do have a question to pose, please ask it now. No more questions, I suppose. As Susanne mentioned, you can always reach out to us at cfp@eepafrica.org. Oh, and then we have another question just popped up just now. Matthew asked, are you able to finance a duplicated quality project from another region, or should we be 100% innovative?
No, we can't.
Yeah, sorry. If that would be a replication project practically for us, if I understand it correctly. So we would assess innovation in the kind of a country context of that focus country. So if you're already working in country X and want to do the same thing in country Z, then we would kind of see if it's innovative in the country Z. If it is, then that's fine. Then it would be considered as a replication project.
Thank you. Last call for questions. Do you already have a sense of what value for money you would be looking for? For example, the amount of grant versus the beneficiaries?
Not that relevant for us. We really going to focus on the sorry, there's the echo again. Thanks. So the main focus for us is really look at your business. We are at early stage. We don't expect massive numbers in terms of sales and beneficiaries. Our donors are not asking like, what is the euro or dollar value for beneficiary that you're producing. The idea is that we'll get you more attractive as a company for follow-on investors. And then hopefully we keep a relationship with you the next 4 years so that we understand the true impact metric. So according to our results framework towards our donors also, we have an impact metric of 4 years after the grant closure. So hopefully after 4 years of grant closure, you are getting bigger numbers in terms of beneficiaries or customers reached. And then that would be kind of great for us. But the immediate kind of success metric for us, as I was explaining, is are you progressing as a company or is your project progressing more towards kind of profitability and sustainability and hence future impact.
Thank you. We'll take our last couple of questions here. So are startup companies eligible without any implemented project records?
Yes, we have funded projects or companies that have not had extensive implementation yet. However, we would need to see a minimum viable product, either on the technology or the business model side. So something that you have proven might work, proof of concept is there, and then you take that to piloting stage. We need to see some traction. Please don't design a project just for this grant, basically.
And the final question is, can you tell us about the technical assistance that you provide for the applicant?
With pleasure. We have it's quite important, quite an important topic for us. Because we work with so many early stage companies. So we have some ring-fenced funding that is available for our grantees. They can be used quite flexibly. So we work with Open Capital Advisors as our sort of primary TA provider to support on any range of topics that the company might need support on. Usually we try to limit to about one assignment per grant, but we do a lot of cohort level support as well. So training around investment readiness, training around marketing strategies, go-to-market strategies, etc. We can also pool assignments. So that's sort of on that TA side. We have started piloting fractional hires together with Shortlist to provide a fractional CFO or fractional marketing lead for a company to help them fill that gap where they don't have the resources to have somebody in place full time. So that's currently in piloting stage. And then what we also consider under TA is we pay for industry association memberships to help you sort of step beyond your geographic scope, network internationally. So that's primarily for international industry associations such as GOGLA, ARI, AMDA, etc. And then we also sponsor you to attend one industry event per grant, which you can attend. So we pay for your ticket, your flight, accommodation, etc., to attend that conference. So popular ones like the GOGLA Forum or the ARI Energy Access Investor Forum. And then there's obviously the day-to-day TA that our portfolio managers provide, you know, that elbow grease that we put in to help you with reporting, you know, guide you on, you know, where we see some gaps maybe in your company. But what we really want to see is that if you have a TA need, that like it really is grantee driven. It's not imposed by us. So that's a very important aspect there as well. You see, did I miss something? I'm not sure. I think I covered it.
Yeah, I think that was a thorough explanation. And yeah, we have, as I mentioned, it's a ring-fence budget, annual budget, and then we also diversify as we go. So the offering today is much more diverse than it was 2 years ago. So we'll try to learn on the go also ourselves, and that's why it's important that you also tell us what your needs are and come forward with ideas so that we can also then inform our donors, argue for appropriate budget, and hence kind of evolve our TA offering over the years. And many times, if we already see that you might be getting TA support from Get Invest or Prio or some other TA facilities, then obviously we would maybe direct our resource towards a grantee that doesn't receive any TA from anywhere. So we'll try to keep that coordination aspect also as the budget is limited, so that kind of hopefully as many as possible get at least some technical assistance.
Thank you so much, both. I see 2 more questions popping up. Do you want to answer those, or shall we conclude?
I see LPG, so that's not eligible. What else is there?
There you go. And there's a question from Peter here. Is there a ranking or weighing system for your evaluation of EOI later for the full proposal?
Not really. So we rank. It's not really a ranking system. We score each aspect, as I mentioned in a slide earlier, based on, you know, the strength of the response and other criteria, such as, you know, as I mentioned, around the applicant profile, you know, origins, etc. The only weighting or weighing we do is for the responses on risks, because we understand that, you know, you might not be willing to divulge like all your key risks. So we just weigh that at 0.5, and also the completeness of your documents that are not mandatory. So there we also weigh that as a 0.5. But other than that, there's not really any ranking on the different categories. So please put your effort in on all of the categories. Don't forget any.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that we will slowly conclude now. Many thanks to Jussi and Susanne for answering the questions, and thank you all for the questions. Just a reminder that if your question was not answered in this call, please check our frequently asked questions that will be updated and shared on our website very shortly. Okay. So as mentioned earlier, the recording of this session and the presentation will be available to you soon also on our website. And we have just put a feedback link in the chat. So we encourage you to take a few minutes to let us know your thoughts on this session. And another thank you to John of Plentify. Another congratulations for winning the Project of the Year award. And we invite all of you back tomorrow for the final day of Knowledge Week, where we will hear firsthand from women-led enterprises in our portfolio as they share their challenges and successes in navigating the complex journey of accessing finance. The registration can be found on our website at eepafrica.org. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we will see you next time.
Thank you all.
Bye, all the best.